How do you celebrate Halloween? Carving pumpkins? Trick-or-treating? A costume party, maybe? What if I told you that arson on a mass scale was once tradition for the residents of Detroit every October 30th, on a night known locally as Devil's Night? The unofficial holiday started out nearly a decade ago with childlike mischief and stayed that way for decades. Although over the past 40 years, Devil's Night has been known for an entirely different tradition, where citizens choose to set ablaze vacant and sometimes occupied homes and buildings. Since the 1980s, the city's inhabitants have had to endure the fear and terror of Devil's Night and the devastation left in its aftermath. Detroit, Michigan, is a large Midwestern city that has witnessed more than its fair share of highs and lows. A once thriving metropolis known for its booming automotive industry, the city grew in population from less than 500,000 residents in 1910 to over 1.8 million at its peak in 1950. This growth led Detroit to become the fourth largest city in the United States, and it's in this time of massive prosperity that we find the origin of the Devil's Night holiday. The precursor to Devil's Night was Britain's Mischief Night, an unofficial holiday celebrated by kids and teenagers, with the earliest known reference to Mischief Night dating back to 1790. As the legend goes, on the night before Halloween, children would play harmless pranks on their neighbors, friends, and family. Mischief Night had found its way to the United States, and in particular Detroit, as the city began ascending on its meteoric rise in the early to mid-1900s. Historians cite October 30th, 1929 as the first Devil's Night in Detroit. The day prior, known infamously as Black Tuesday, was the day the stock market crashed and began the chain of events that led to the Great Depression, a 10-year economic death spiral that had ripple effects around the world. At the time, it was the largest economic disaster in history. The 1920s had been a period of unprecedented growth for the U.S., and in particular the city of Detroit, which was fueled by the exponentially growing automotive industry based there. In a single day, thousands of investors were wiped out and billions of dollars lost. Industrial cities like Detroit were among the hardest hit by this blindsiding economic catastrophe, while those with money to invest had their own hardships to deal with. The average worker in Detroit had it dramatically worse. With one of the highest unemployment rates in the country, thousands of Detroiters that had recently been thriving were now left destitute. It started with mischievous pranks and petty criminal behavior, egging, toilet papering, and the like, which resulted in little property damage, with the annual event being more of a nuisance to the local police and fire departments. The lighthearted vandalism escalated as the years went on, with riots in 1943 and 1967 only leading to a buildup of tension in a city with an apparent need for a release every year on October 30th. However, until this point, the evening of Devil's Night had never resulted in any real mayhem. A newspaper article from the Detroit Free Press on October 29, 1975, points out just how seemingly innocent the events of Devil's Night were expected to be, and provided a guide to property owners on how to prepare for what was to come, with advice from Detroit police officer Walter Zamia, a 3-year veteran of the Police Youth Bureau. The article titled, "Goblin-Proof Your House, How to Beat the Devil," starts with, "If Devil's Night Thursday is anything like last year's, Detroiters should be prepared for some downright malicious tricks, according to the Detroit Police Department." The article goes on to state, property owners usually are fairly tolerant of routine mischief, but if a child does serious damage, such as spray painting, breaking fences or windows, homeowners should attempt to get his name and then call the police. For residents who wanted tips on how to goblin-proof their house, Officer Zamia offered the following advice. Put garbage cans in the garage and lock it, if possible. Take the car off the street. Take in your pumpkin if you don't want it smeared across the windows. Get after the toilet paper in the trees and shrubbery before it rains, or the job will be twice as tough. A good shower with a garden hose will get soap and egg off your windows and walls. A final tip from the article: one popular Detroit goblin trick to beware of. If someone throws lighted paper on your porch, do not rush to stomp it out. There may be animal droppings inside. Before the article's close, Officer Zamia was asked if he would allow his son to go out on Devil's Night. As a police officer, I would have to say no, but as the father of a red-blooded American boy, I would have to say yes, but tell him, if he gets into trouble, he's on his own. This article about how to prepare for Devil's Night was only describing the calm before the storm, as madness would descend over the city in the coming years. Detroit would forever change once those first fires broke out, the pushed-over garbage cans and toilet-papered trees being a quaint memory of a world that was now gone. It was in the early 1980s when arson became the go-to Devil's Night celebration for some residents of Detroit. City officials at the time placed the blame largely on the city's youth, taking steps through the schools to reach out to teenagers in an attempt to prevent them from taking part in Devil's Night. Realistically, unemployment had been rising for years, and properties all over Detroit and its suburbs began to go abandoned. It wasn't just the youth of Detroit participating in the Devil's Night fires. People all over town had their own reasons for wanting to watch it burn. The suspected motivations for the fires had varying levels of malice that ranged from pranks to insurance scams, to people wanting to destroy abandoned structures that were common hotspots for shady activity in their neighborhoods. Motivations surely included outright violence towards individuals, as with city resources being spread so thin, the likelihood of getting caught in the act was fairly low. While many of these former homes and structures were unoccupied, that was not always the case, and people have been injured and have died as a result of the chaos on Devil's Night. What started decades earlier as a night of mischief had become a night of violence and terror, where people and businesses were targeted, and an outstretched police and fire department could not keep up. Devil's Night in 1983 was an especially terrible event, where the city saw 511 arsons take place, including the death of one citizen and multiple firefighters being injured in the line of duty. In the early 1980s, it was common for the Detroit Fire Department to respond to 50 to 60 fires on an average day. Leading up to Devil's Night in 1984, the mayor of Detroit, Coleman Young, instituted a controversial special youth curfew aimed at stemming the escalating violence. Detroit Fire Commissioner Mel Jefferson, in a press conference, was quoted as saying, "I'm sure with the cooperation of all the departments and all the citizens that we've been working with, that this year will not be anything like last year." Jefferson could not have been more wrong in his prediction, as the curfew and other tactics taken in preparation for October 30th, 1984, proved to not be enough, as the terror spiked to an all-time high when 810 fires were set. Fires burned faster than the fire department was capable of dealing with. A firefighter was quoted as saying, "There have been fires all over the city all day long. As we picked up from our last one, an alarm was struck for another." For the first time since the 1967 riots, fire companies from surrounding suburbs had to be called into Detroit to help tame the onslaught of fires burning. As a result of Devil's Night in 1984, the city was branded as the arson capital of the world. News coverage spanned the globe, and in subsequent years, Detroit saw a tourism industry arise, where those with a morbid fascination for flames would visit the city on Halloween just to personally witness the chaos. A news team from Japan even made the trip to provide first-hand coverage of Devil's Night to audiences back home. The arsons declined over the next 10 years, but were still at levels that were out of control. 479 fires burned on Devil's Night in 1985, despite all the increased public and government intervention. The period of time in which the fires were set extended to 3 days preceding Halloween, leading some in the firefighting community to refer to that time of year as Devil's Week. On October 28, 1991, the mayor of Detroit, Coleman Young, warned local news media it would be a mistake to over-publicize and remind too many people or everybody, the Devil's Night is the night the city burns down. After Devil's Night in 1994, when 300 fires were set, public outcry led to the city giving the unofficial holiday a new name, Angel's Night. Since then, thousands of volunteers have come together to patrol their communities on Angel's Night in an effort to reduce the fear that came with the end of October each year. According to the city of Detroit, the plan was a success, as the presence of so many folks with flashlights and matching t-shirts helped drive away any would-be arsonists off their blocks. Aside from an uptick in arson on Devil's Night in 2010, the numbers show that the community efforts to prevent the vandalism and arson that once plagued Detroit have worked. In 2016, there was some speculation that Devil's Night may have changed dates when on July 4th of that year, Detroit and its suburbs experienced 140 fires, an amount that was triple the number of fires set on the previous Devil's Night. However, this event appears to be an outlier. In 2017, city officials announced that after 3 consecutive years of low fire numbers, future efforts of the long-running Angel's Night campaign will focus on a community celebration for children and families. From now on, Halloween in Detroit isn't going to be about fear. It's going to be about fun, Mayor Mike Duggan said in a statement to local media. Fire Commissioner Eric Jones said, "Quite frankly, there just isn't the fire activity anymore to justify this kind of mass mobilization." The city's new event on the night before Halloween, in replacement of the Angel's Night program, is officially known as Halloween in the D, and is aimed at connecting the community by holding events where families can safely take their kids trick-or-treating. For now, the smoldering ashes of Detroit's Devil's Night are no longer a threat each year, but will it stay that way forever? If you enjoyed this episode of Black Letters and want more, be sure to like and subscribe. Until next time, I'll see you in your nightmares.